I didn't realize that Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal are all up for sale. Donald Trump has been talking about literally buying these countries and possibly making them states under a unified Greater America. Hell, throw Mexico into the mix and we can even unify all of North America with Canada, the US, and Mexico under the Republic of American governance. But seriously, is it even possible to just buy a country in 2025? Yeah, actually it kind of is, and we've been doing it all throughout history. This isn't even the first time that America tried to buy Greenland. Trump himself suggested it in 2019. They also tried back in 1910 and again in 1946 when President Truman offered $100 million, which is $1 billion in today's money, to buy it off Denmark, which Denmark currently owns Greenland, just FYI, but they can technically declare their independence whenever they want. But since Greenland has a population of just about 56,000 people, which is literally half the population of a single neighborhood in Manhattan, they kind of rely on the $500 million they get from Denmark every year to survive. Now, the US and Denmark have actually done business before when it comes to buying countries. The Danish West Indies were a series of islands in the Caribbean that Denmark owned up until 1917, when the US bought them for $25 million in gold coins and renamed them the US Virgin Islands, which we still have today. Then there's also Alaska, which belonged to Russia up until 1867, when the US bought it for $7.2 million because Russia sorta needed the money. But these are all just territories. How exactly do you buy a whole ass country? Like, what even happens? It's sort of like buying land and also being able to tell everyone on that land how they should act and what you'll give them in return for cooperating. And dozens of other implications that you would never think of. Well, can you buy a country? Like, if you were a billionaire with enough money, could you just step in, present an offer they can't refuse, and boom, it's yours? Not quite. It's pretty complicated, but it all falls back to acquiring something called the allodial title of the land, which means you own the land outright with no higher entity owning it above you. When you buy land anywhere in the world today, what you're really buying is something called the fee simple title, which means the country the land is in still technically kinda owns it. You can do and build whatever you want on this land as long as you obey their laws. Allodial titles of the land aren't exactly available anymore today, but is actually how countries like Liechtenstein were purchased back in the 1700s. And most of the time, only a country itself can really hold or buy allodial titles. So in order to buy a country, first you gotta be a country. And this is how you can start your own country legally. The first thing you need is land. And we already have our first problem. If you look at the world, you'll see that pretty much all land has already been claimed by other nations. Since you can't really buy any of these countries until you are your own country, the only other way to claim any of this land for yourself would be by force, aka invade. Even if you have enough money to fund a guerrilla military force to invade a small country, let's focus on doing this peacefully. In this case, we can look for tiny areas of land that lay on the border of two different countries that neither of them claim, also known as terra nullius, Latin for nobody's land, and is actually how the micronation of Liberland was formed, a section along the border of Croatia and Serbia that neither of them claimed. There's also the region of Bir Tawil between Egypt and Sudan, which remains unclaimed to this day, but it's a barren wasteland of sand with no water, so good luck with that. You can try to claim a part of the Mary Birdland in Antarctica, which is technically unclaimed, but you'd be breaching the Antarctic Treaty, which will lead to complications. Despite that, Antarctica actually already has a few micronations of its own that people have tried to claim. The Duchy of Campania, the Grand Duchy of Flandrensis, and West Arctica are all real Antarctic micronations, but none of these are taken very seriously. But I'll show you how your country can be. We can go remote, super remote, and there are actually many islands in the Pacific Ocean that remain unclaimed to this day that you can try to take for yourself. Given how far and isolated they are, it'll be quite difficult to bring any required goods and services there to set up basic infrastructure, so again, good luck. We can always build our own country, as per Sealand, a micronation off the shore of England that consists of a platform on two pillars in the ocean. As long as you're at least 12 miles past the shore of any other country, you're technically in international waters and are good to go. Either an oil rig type base like Sealand or even a floating nation on an enormous barge, which surprisingly no one has done yet. If you happen to have an extra $1 trillion laying around, you can always just buy dirt and pour it into the shallowest part of the sea to physically create your own island from scratch. Or if you have the time, you can always wait a couple 100,000 years for volcanoes to form new islands in the ocean and claim that. You can always go the Atlantis route and build a city directly on the sea floor. Although I'm not sure if our technology is there yet, there aren't any laws that say we can't. Well, there are your options. Once you have your land, you can move on to step 2, establish a permanent population, which there are technically no minimums for how many people are needed to start a country. The micronation of Forvik on a remote island near Scotland has a population of about 4 plus. But they do need to live there for more than half the year, so go find some willing new citizens. Then you need to determine your system of government. You want to be a democracy, a dictatorship, maybe go back to monarchy, or maybe even create a whole new system. Perhaps just go full-blown libertarian and let everyone govern themselves. Obviously, you need to create your own flag, which there aren't really any strict rules for, so go crazy. And then you need to write a constitution, or whatever you choose to call it, which is really just a document that summarizes the laws, principles, and entities that make up the government in your country. All right, we're making progress. But now we need the one thing to even be up for consideration as an independent nation on an international scale. A representative that is your country's direct line of communication with others, your Secretary of State. Technically speaking, having a military, social services, and even basic infrastructure are not requirements to be a country, but a Secretary of State is necessary. Find someone that's willing to do the job and they're in. Any country that wants to talk to you has to go through them first. Now the biggest and hardest part of the whole process: gain international recognition. You need to formally declare independence in order to be internationally recognized as a sovereign state. To do this, you basically just have to make friends with other countries' secretaries of state so they take you seriously, which is kind of what Taiwan did, or tried to do. Despite calling itself independent since 1949, to this day there are only 12 countries that recognize it as such. So this process may take a really long time. Let your secretary go on a decades-long, possibly even generational world tour to make friends with other world government leaders to build your case. Then when you have enough people who like you on your side, you may want to consider joining the UN for further credibility. To do that, you just need to write a letter to the Secretary General of the UN to request membership. Literally, that's all you need to do. You can easily find the mailing address online too. If you win at least a 2/3 majority vote by the Security Council, which are these 15 countries here, and you only have to win over 10 of them, congrats, you're in. You're now part of the UN. Now, you don't have to be part of the UN to be an independent nation, but it sure helps your case. The end goal here is just to be recognized by other real countries as being your own independent nation. As there are small countries like Vatican City, Taiwan, and Kosovo that aren't part of the UN, but are still globally recognized as sovereign states by at least one other major country. This process is called diplomatic recognition and requires an official spokesperson of a country to make a statement and say they recognize a country as independent. In essence, an invite-only club where you need to get referred by a member of the club to join, and that's all it takes. There are actually many micronations around the world like Liberland, West Arctica, and Sealand. The problem with these is that none of them are formally recognized by any other country except often by each other. So they're missing that final and crucial step of international recognition in their journey. But after all this, if you finally manage to start your own country and gain that coveted international recognition, we can buy a country, right? You just need a couple $billion to even start discussions on buying the smallest country there is, and likely no one will take your offer seriously. Even if a government somehow agrees to sell you their country, then you still need to gain the approval of the people living there to complete a peaceful transfer. And that, my friends, is how you can buy a country. Clearly, there's a reason that regular people never do this.